Hey, good morning. You guys like my new Auburn coffee mug? The schedule is mean, Lou.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. 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 Clap your hands, clap, clap, clap. Stomp your feet, stomp, stomp, stomp. Spin around, spin, spin, spin. All right.
It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Coffee talk time today. Hadn't done one of these coffee talk videos in a while, so it's time we do one. Going to talk about a few things that are going on in the world of college football. Some comments that I've been getting in the comments section and haven't really had time to do a video on. You guys know the routine with these coffee talk videos, really just whatever's on my mind lately. And we are going to start with the talk or the conversation or whatever you want to call it around moving the Georgia-Auburn football game from November to earlier in the year. Now, Georgia and Auburn, of course, play every year. Auburn and Georgia are the cross-division game that gets played every year in the SEC. If you don't know how SEC scheduling works, of course, there's two divisions. You play every single team within your own division. So in the case of Georgia, we play every single team from the East every single year. Then we play two teams from the West each year. One team that we play from the West is on a rotating schedule. So there's 7 teams. So we play, every 6 years we play them. Play them there 1 year, home following year. But then the second game that we play against the West every year, and this is true for every team in the SEC, is the same team every single year. So Georgia and Auburn, Auburn in the West, Georgia in the East, they play every single year, and that game is played in November. Every single year since 1937. These two teams have played in November. Some of the other ones that you guys know, Alabama and Tennessee, opposite divisions, play every single year. Florida and LSU, opposite divisions, play every single year. You get the idea. Every team in the East has one team in the West that they play every single year, and then you play one other team from the West, and it's on a rotating basis or schedule. Auburn is mad. Auburn is upset, right? It's not fair. The schedule is cheating. The schedule is mean. Auburn is upset because, of course, they play Alabama the last game of the year, every single year in the Iron Bowl, right? Well, Georgia and Auburn play every single year 2 weeks before the Iron Bowl. It's not like it's back-to-back. It's 2 weeks before. So Auburn gets an opportunity every single year to either schedule a bye week between the Georgia and Alabama game or schedule one of these lower-level FCS or lower-level FBS teams in between the Georgia and Auburn game. Auburn's other beef, of course, is that they have to play Georgia and Alabama on the road in the same year every other year. Now, they conveniently leave out the fact, right, that if Auburn plays Georgia and Alabama every year, and every other year they have to play them on the road, then what does that mean? Well, that means that in the following year, they get to play them both at home. So is it better to have a home game than an away game? Yes. Does it suck to have to play Georgia and Alabama or any two teams really on the road in the same year? Yeah, that sucks. But then the following year, you get them both at home. Take 2 seasons ago as a great example of why this makes no sense if you're an Auburn fan. Auburn had a couple of losses early in the year, right? Talking about 2017 here. A couple of losses earlier in the year. People sort of forgot about them. They got hot the last half of the year. Georgia was ranked number 1 in the playoff poll that was out in November. We were undefeated. We go on the road to Jordan-Hare. What happens? Georgia gets upset. Auburn gets a huge home win in what at the time was one of the biggest Auburn home games in a long, long time. Fast forward 2 weeks. This isn't fair. We have to play Alabama 2 weeks after we played Georgia. Well, guess what? You got them where? At home. At home. You got Georgia at home. Then you got Alabama at home. Alabama comes in ranked number 1 and undefeated. And what happens? Auburn pulls off another upset and gets another win, positioning themselves to play in the SEC title game, where had they won, they would have been in the playoffs. Of course, they didn't win. Now, if either of those 2 games, Georgia or Alabama, would have been on the road, Auburn would have lost. You cannot underestimate the importance of home field advantage in college football in general, and specifically in some of these bigger stadiums in the SEC. It is real. If you're one of these people that pays more attention to the NFL than you do to college, you may not understand that, and that's okay. And this is something I've talked about. In fact, when we had Bad Dog on during the NFL playoffs, and we're talking about the NFL, and listen, when it comes to the NFL, there's nobody I respect more knowledge-wise than Bad Dog. And Bad Dog straight up told you guys, home field advantage in the NFL, not that big of a deal like it is in college, but in college, it's a huge deal, a huge deal. If Auburn would have played either Georgia or Alabama on the road in 2017, they would have lost. They would have lost. If they would have played Georgia on the road, they would have lost. If they'd played Alabama on the road, they would have lost. If they would have, so what Auburn wants is to spread out the Georgia and Alabama games and to play one on the road and one at home every single year. Now, are there going to be years where maybe that works in Auburn's favor? Of course there are. Of course there are. Obviously, right? If Georgia is having a bad year and that happens to be the year you have to play Georgia on the road, that's great. That's great. And then Alabama might be good, but you get them at home. That's great. But college football is cyclical and goes in cycles. So spreading this game out now, breaking this game up now, while Georgia and Alabama happen to be 2 of probably the best 5 programs in college football currently, today, not talking about all time. These people get in the comment sections and talk about how many titles Yale won a long time ago, or Miami, or whatever. That's not what I'm not talking about historically or all. I'm talking about right now. Georgia and Alabama, without question, 2 of the best 5 teams. So is it hard for Auburn to have to play both those teams in a 3-week period? Yes. Yes, it is. But you don't know what the state of college football is going to be 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 50 years down the road, right? This is something that I have heard Tennessee fan cry about a lot over the last 10 years. It's not fair that we have to play Alabama every single year from the SEC West. Alabama is they're a dynasty. It's not fair. If Georgia had to play Alabama every year, they would have one more loss every year than they do. It's not fair. Okay, Alabama's a great team right now. You did not hear a Tennessee fan crying about having to play Alabama every year from 1993 to 2007, did you? No. Why? Tennessee was good and Alabama was terrible. And that's sort of the point here with this whole Auburn-Georgia schedule change thing. I don't understand what the administration thinks it's going to accomplish over the long term by separating these games, by flipping around where you're not having to play on the road at both Georgia and Alabama in the same year, right? I don't get it. There's going to come a point, whether it's this year, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever, there's going to come a point where Georgia has a bad stretch of years, where Alabama has a bad stretch of years. As great as Alabama has been historically, people forget. They were pretty much irrelevant from 1980 to 1991. Then they had a really good year in 1992, but then they pretty much disappeared again from 1993 to 2007. And that's not a knock on Alabama. It's just an overall point here. Is it fair that last year Auburn had to play at Georgia and at Alabama in a 3-week period? I don't know if it's fair or not. Was it hard? Yeah, it was hard. It was hard. But that's not always going to be the case. It's not always going to be the case. I don't understand the sort of rush to break this thing up just because, and listen, that's the only reason. That's the only reason. Auburn administration, their presidents, their coach, even this clown Gus Malzahn. I mean, these people have straight come out and said it's not a riddle. There's nothing to decipher here. You don't have to guess. I mean, they straight out have come out and told you it's not fair. It's too hard to have to play at Georgia and at Alabama in a 3-week period at the end of the year. That's just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. And Georgia has basically rolled over to the SEC and to Auburn and said, fine, change the schedule, make the changes. Now, I respect Georgia for pretty much having the same opinion that I have when it comes to scheduling. If you want to be a playoff team, an elite team, a division contender, a conference contender, whatever, a top 10 team, you've got to play and beat some pretty good teams, whether it's in September or October or November. You have to beat them. You have to beat them. It doesn't matter when it falls on the schedule. There are some years I look at Georgia's schedule and I say, wow, we got this pretty tough, 3 or 4 stretch of games here. Sure would be nice if we could take one of these games and move it to a different part of the season where maybe we're playing a couple of cupcakes or something. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, you can look at any schedule and find that in any given year. But to sort of upset the apple cart here with the Georgia-Auburn game, a game that's been played every year in November since 1937, because Auburn is mad and their feelings are hurt because Georgia and Alabama happen to be 2 really good teams right now, and they have to play them in a 3-week period at the end of the year, either on the road, both in the same year, or and they never mention the second part, which means they get them both at home in the same year. And why do they leave that out every time they cry about this? Well, it's obvious why they leave it out. You don't hear them complaining, and I didn't hear any Auburn fan, coach, administrator, player, nothing complaining in 2017 that they got to play Georgia and Alabama both at home. I didn't hear any of them complaining about that. But last year, we heard it all season long. From the time the season started, that's all we heard. Man, this is ridiculous, man. Auburn's going to get to 9-0, and then they got to play Georgia and Alabama in a 3-week period, both on the road. This isn't fair. Nobody in college football can beat Georgia and Alabama on the road in the same season in a 3-week period. This just isn't fair. You didn't hear any of that crying in 2017. But there sure was plenty of it in 2018. Let's look at the schedules in 2019. Okay, I'm going to put Georgia's schedule and Auburn's schedule up on the screen right now for 2019. Okay, here it is. Take a look. All right, and like I mentioned, if you don't know, basically what they're looking to do, and you can see Georgia's schedule right here. I got Georgia and Auburn pulled up on the screen. So basically what Auburn is wanting to do, and Georgia has said, I don't care, do whatever you want, is now this isn't happening in 2019. The earliest this could happen would be 2020, and they've got to get all these details ironed out really, really soon because the 2020 schedule gets announced by the SEC here in a couple of months. So, but anyway, this is the 2019, so this isn't changing. I'm just using this as an example here. But you take, okay, you got the Georgia-Auburn game, right, November 16th, and that's at Auburn. What Auburn is wanting to do, basically, is move that game to October 5th, right? That's what they want to do. So Georgia would basically be switching the Tennessee and the Auburn games. Now, should I be crying right now? Look at this. Now, why do we have to play at Tennessee and at Auburn, both on the road in the same year? This isn't fair, woo! Now, Tennessee and Auburn are 2 terrible programs right now. But let's pretend for a second that Tennessee and Auburn are actually legitimate teams. Am I supposed to cry because we have to play both of them on the road in the same year? I mean, do you understand the stupidity of this now? Listen, Tennessee had a great team from basically the last half of the 90s, right? Great teams. Peyton Manning, then, of course, won a title with T. Martin. Even and into the 2000s, they had some pretty good teams, too, winning the division a few times. But they've been terrible the last 10 years. But what if Tennessee was really, really good in 2010, right? Or 2013, the 2 years that Auburn made the national title game, winning the national title in 2010, choking and blowing a huge lead to Florida State and losing the national title game in 2013. But I digress, though. But what if Tennessee had been really good in one or both of those years. Is Georgia fans supposed to then cry that they had to play on the road against Tennessee and Auburn in the same year? That's not fair because they're both good, woo. No, of course we're not supposed to cry. This is just how it goes. You never know. I mean, you don't know how good or bad any of these teams are going to be. Look at these teams on your screen. You don't know how good or bad any of these teams are going to be in the year 2030. So what is the point of upending a schedule that's been, this Georgia-Auburn game has been, 80 years? And you want to move it because Georgia and Alabama both happen to be good now. So basically, Georgia would have at Vandy, home against two nobodies, home against a third nobody in Notre Dame. Then we would have a bye week before we played at Auburn, right? Because that's what they want to do. Look at the schedule. They want to switch the Auburn and Tennessee games. Well, I can hear Auburn fan now. Oh, this ain't fair. Look at Georgia scheduling an off week before the Auburn game. This ain't fair. This ain't fair. So the game will be played on October 5th, right? And then you look at the Auburn schedule, and of course, they've got the Alabama and Georgia at the end of the year. Now this year, they get them both at home. So notice they don't want to make a change this year. No, let's wait till 2020 when we have to play them on the road. Okay? But they want to move the Georgia game to October 5th. All right? So instead of playing at Florida on October 5th, you get to play home against Georgia. Okay? Well, guess what that means? That means on Saturday, November 16th, you get to go on the road and play at Florida. That's what that would mean. And then we get to hear the crying about how you had to play a tough Mississippi State team the week before we played Georgia. The point is, you can look at any schedule and find a reason to cry if that's your goal. If that's really what you're looking to do. This just makes no sense to me. Now, what are my feelings on it from a Georgia perspective overall? Because I've gotten this question a ton of times over the last week or so when this story has really started to take off. How do you feel about moving the Auburn game, Lou? What do you think that means for Georgia? It doesn't matter to me. I'm a little irritated that it seems like anytime there's another team that wants to change something that would somehow affect Georgia, it does seem like the administration at Georgia just sort of rolls over and says, all right, that's fine. Go ahead. Tradition, to me, is one of the best things about college football. Now, I personally don't care whether we play Auburn week 1, week 12, or any week in between. I personally don't care. I don't think they're going to be very good this year. They were good in 2013. They were great in 2010. There's been other years. They were good in 2017. They've got some 3 and 4 win seasons in the last decade. You don't know. So it doesn't matter to me whether how do I know whether Georgia's going to benefit or suffer from playing Auburn in the beginning of the season versus the end in the year 2028? I don't know. Basically, what the SEC is doing here is they're saying, okay, if two teams on your schedule happen to be really, really good, just cry about it for a couple of years, and then the SEC will just monkey with the scheduling and change it around. And Georgia's just like, fine, we don't care, and I don't care either. It just seems, but the tradition part of it bothers me a little bit. We play South Carolina the first half of the season every single year. We played them in September almost every single year as far back as I can remember. But 2 years ago, the game had to be moved for some scheduling conflicts. It had to get moved towards the end of the year. And it didn't seem right. It seemed strange. I didn't really notice it that much in the beginning of the year. Like, okay, we normally would be playing South Carolina right now. This seems kind of strange. It didn't really strike me as strange in the beginning of the year. But then when November rolled around and we were playing South Carolina, it just felt weird. It just felt strange. I wasn't mad about it. I definitely wasn't crying about it. I definitely wasn't demanding that the SEC make changes and never do this again. But the tradition of playing South Carolina in the first part of Georgia's schedule means something to me. Tradition to me is one of the things that separates college football from a lot of the other sports that we like to watch. whether that be the NFL or whatever. To me, the tradition of college football, specifically the tradition of Southern and SEC college football, just means a lot to me. It just means a lot. I seriously doubt. Notice, if you will, Auburn was not interested in changing the date of the Auburn-Alabama game. Why? The tradition of the Iron Bowl being played at the end of the year. So even Auburn fan and Auburn administration and all these crybabies crying about how the schedule is mean, woo, even they recognize that tradition means something. They're just valuing their in-state rival, Alabama, in that tradition. They're placing more value on the tradition of that than the tradition of the Deep South's oldest rivalry, which is Georgia and Auburn. And I can't say I blame them for that, given the choice between the two. Obviously, the Georgia-Alabama game is bigger in terms of rivalry and things like that than the Auburn-Georgia game, for obvious reasons. It's an in-state rivalry. Everyone knows the bitterness that exists between Auburn and Alabama fans. So I'm not trying to say that the Georgia-Auburn game is more important or better or has more tradition or any of that than the Auburn-Alabama game, but the point remains the same. It's tradition, and you didn't hear any Auburn fans, players, administration, coaches, nothing, crying about this schedule wanting to change the date of the Alabama game. It was the Georgia game, and I don't care. I honestly don't care. What's our record against Auburn this century? What year are we in? 2019. So we played them 19 or 20 times because we played them twice one year. What have they beat us 5 times? Are we 15-5 against Auburn this century? Something like that. And listen, that doesn't mean anything for the year 2025 or 2030 or 2040, right? And that's sort of the point. You're changing this around now because Georgia and Alabama happen to be two really good programs, and you don't think it's fair that you have to play them in a 3-week period. Not even back-to-back. A 3-week period. I mean, I can look on any schedule. Here, we'll pull Georgia's schedule. I'll put Georgia's schedule, or both Georgia and Auburn's schedule, back up on the screen. And let me see what I can find to cry about here that's not fair. And keep in mind, we don't even have to find back-to-back games. Any hard games that occur within a 3-week period are not fair. Okay, so let's see is it fair that we have to play Notre Dame in Tennessee in a 3-week period? Well, maybe, because Tennessee's still on the way back. Here you go. Is this fair? We've got to play Florida and Auburn in a 3-week period. This isn't fair. Okay, now suddenly I'm supposed to change my mind and agree with Auburn that the game should be moved because this isn't fair. How do they expect us to play Florida and Auburn in a 3-week period? This isn't fair. And on top of that, we have another SEC game in between there. Missouri. Compare that to Auburn's schedule, okay? They're crying because they have to play Georgia and Alabama in a 3-week period, and in between that, they have something called Samford. It just makes no sense. It just makes no sense. So again, to sort of wrap this up, right? To my quick summary or whatever. About 15 minutes too late for a quick summary, Lou. Yeah, I get that. Do I care when we play Auburn on the schedule from a wins and loss, from a chance to win perspective? No. Do I sort of feel like Auburn belongs at the end of the year because it's been played there since 1937? Yeah, tradition matters to me, just like the South Carolina game being in the beginning of the year. You just get accustomed to certain games being played at certain times of the year. Do I think that because Georgia and Alabama are good right now and Auburn wants to split those games up, one in the first half of the schedule, one in the back half of the schedule, that will be a benefit to Auburn in the short term? Yeah, it probably will. It probably will benefit Auburn some in the short term not to have to play Georgia and Alabama in a 3-week period. Do I think that will benefit them in the year 2030, 2040, or 2050? I don't have any idea. There's no way to know. There's no way to know, and that is sort of the point that drives all this home. You are making a rash, irrational decision based on the state of college football right now, and it sort of sets a precedent that, okay, anytime two teams happen to be good at the same time in the future and you have them on your schedule in a 3-week period, all you have to do is cry and blow your nose to the SEC commissioner and hold up a hoop and let him jump through it, and they'll change the schedule for you. I just think it's ridiculous. And every Barner that has cried about this and demanded that this schedule be changed, every one of you ought to be embarrassed and ashamed of yourself. Ashamed. The only way this could have been any worse is if you idiots would have showed up at the SEC offices with some protest signs and marching and holding hands and singing chants and whatnot. You people are, I'll talk to y'all later.
Huh?